I thought selling the old beach house would finally bring me peace, but the moment I heard a small voice behind that rotten door, I realized the past wasn't finished with my family yet. My name is Margaret Collins, I'm 67 years old, and until recently I believed there were no more surprises left in my life. After my husband Robert passed away 3 years ago, the world became very quiet. Too quiet sometimes. Our children had their own lives, our friends had grown older or moved away, and the house we once filled with laughter now echoed with memories instead. That was why the beach house had to go. The place sat on the rocky coast of Maine, about 2 hours from Portland, a weathered cedar cottage Robert and I bought nearly 30 years ago when Daniel, our son, was still a boy who spent his summers chasing seagulls and building crooked sandcastles. Back then the paint was fresh, the porch boards didn't creak, and the salty wind carried the promise of long, happy weekends. But time has a way of changing everything. Storms rolled in year after year. The ocean air gnawed at the wood, and after Robert died, I simply stopped visiting. The last time I stood on that porch was the summer before he got sick, watching the tide roll in while he grilled burgers and told one of his terrible jokes. When Daniel and his wife Emily started insisting that I should sell the property, I didn't argue. "Mom, it's just sitting there falling apart," Daniel had said during Sunday dinner. "You don't need the stress of maintaining it." Emily nodded quickly beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "It would be better to let it go, Margaret. You deserve something simpler." Maybe they were right. A woman my age didn't need a second house 200 miles away. Still, the decision felt heavier than I expected. Letting go of the beach house felt like closing the final chapter of the life Robert and I had built together. But eventually practicality won, and I called a local realtor who said the place still had value because of the ocean view. All I needed to do was visit once more, clear out whatever remained inside and hand over the keys. So on a cool gray morning in early October, I drove north along the coastal highway, watching the Atlantic appear and disappear between the pine trees. The air smelled like salt and damp leaves, and for a moment I almost turned the car around. Yet something told me I needed to see the house one last time. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the cottage looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint had faded to a tired gray, and the wooden shutters hung slightly crooked. I stepped out of the car and heard nothing but the distant crash of waves and the call of a single gull overhead. The front door stuck as I pushed it open, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been used in years. Inside, the house felt colder than the autumn air outside, and dust floated through thin beams of light slipping between the blinds. I told myself it was just an old house doing what old houses do, settling and creaking in the wind. But as I set my bag down and walked slowly through the living room, I noticed something that made me stop. One of the kitchen chairs was pulled slightly away from the table, as if someone had stood up from it not long ago. I frowned, trying to remember whether I had left it like that the last time I visited. That had been almost 4 years ago. Surely I would remember something so simple. I shook my head and continued down the narrow hallway toward the back of the house, telling myself not to be foolish. Yet with every step, the strange feeling grew stronger, like the house was quietly waiting for me to discover something it had been hiding all along. The hallway smelled faintly of salt and old wood, the kind of scent that never completely leaves a house by the ocean, and as I walked slowly toward the back of the cottage I kept telling myself that the strange feeling in my chest was only nostalgia mixed with a little bit of loneliness, nothing more. The kitchen looked almost exactly as Robert and I had left it years earlier, though everything had gathered a thin layer of dust that softened the edges of familiar objects. The same blue coffee mugs hung from the rack near the window, the same chipped bowl still sat beside the sink, and the calendar on the wall still showed the month of July from 4 summers ago. I stepped closer to the table and touched the back of the chair that had been pulled away. The wood felt cool beneath my hand. For a moment I simply stood there, trying to remember the last time someone had sat in that chair. I knew it had not been me. When I visited the house in the past, I usually stayed only an hour or two, opening windows, checking for storm damage, and then driving back home before sunset. I never make coffee here anymore, never sat down for a meal. Yet the chair looked as though it had been used recently, pushed back in a casual way that felt strangely human. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Perhaps a real estate agent had stopped by to take photos of the exterior. Maybe a maintenance worker had come in to check the plumbing. Still, something about the silence in the house made that explanation feel uncertain. I walked over to the window and looked out toward the ocean. The gray water stretched across the horizon, rolling steadily beneath the cloudy sky. A small fishing boat moved slowly in the distance, and the sound of the waves reached the house in long, patient rhythms. The calm view should have comforted me, yet the feeling that someone else had been here refused to fade. I decided the best thing to do was finish what I came for. I opened a few cabinets and began placing old dishes into a cardboard box I had brought from the car. The simple movement of packing helped settle my nerves. Plate after plate disappeared into the box while memories returned quietly with each item. I remembered Daniel sitting at this very table when he was 10 years old, begging Robert to let him stay up late to watch the meteor shower. I remembered rainy afternoons when the three of us played board games while the wind rattled the windows. Those memories felt warm and distant, like photographs from another life. When the first box was full, I carried it into the living room and set it near the door. That was when I heard it. At first the sound was so faint I thought it might be the wind moving through the trees outside. But after a moment it came again. A soft noise from somewhere above me. Sounded like a footstep. I froze in the middle of the room, listening carefully. The old house creaked in the breeze, the floorboards shifting gently as they always had. Yet beneath those familiar sounds there it was again, slow and light, as though someone very small was walking across the floor upstairs. I felt a chill run along my arms. No one should have been here. The realtor was not expecting me until tomorrow, and Daniel had told me he would be busy at work all week. I waited another few seconds, holding my breath without realizing it. The sound came a third time, clearer now, moving across the ceiling directly above the hallway that led toward the back rooms. I turned my head toward the staircase and stared up into the dim space above. For the first time since arriving at the cottage, I was absolutely certain of one thing. I was not alone in the house. For several seconds I remained completely still in the middle of the living room, staring toward the staircase as the quiet sound above me faded back into silence. My first instinct was to convince myself it was nothing more than the house settling. Old buildings near the ocean did that all the time. The wood expanded when the air was damp, the floors shifted slightly, and sometimes it sounded almost like footsteps. Robert used to joke about it every summer, saying the cottage had its own personality. But this sound had been different. It had rhythm, like someone moving carefully from one spot to another. I took a slow breath and tried to steady my thoughts. There were many reasonable explanations. Perhaps a raccoon had gotten inside through the attic vent. Animals sometimes wandered into beach houses during the colder months. I had even heard stories about stray cats finding warm places to hide in empty cottages along the coast. That had to be it, I told myself. An animal, nothing more. Still, I felt my heart beating a little faster as I stepped closer to the staircase. The wooden steps curved gently upward along the wall, the railing worn smooth after decades of use. I placed one hand on the rail and listened again. The house had returned to its earlier quiet. Outside, the wind carried the distant crash of waves against the rocks, and somewhere nearby a gull cried out. Over the water. Slowly, I began to climb the stairs. Each step creaked softly beneath my weight, a familiar sound that echoed through the narrow stairwell. I remembered Daniel running up these same steps as a child, racing to the small bedroom at the end of the hall where he kept his comic books and model airplanes. The memory made me smile for just a moment, but the strange tension in the air quickly returned. At the top of the stairs I paused and looked down the hallway. The upstairs level of the cottage had always been simple. 2 small bedrooms faced the ocean, and a narrow bathroom sat between them. The doors were all open now, revealing quiet rooms filled with dust and pale light from the windows. Nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. I walked slowly toward the first bedroom and pushed the door open a little wider. The room still held the same twin bed and wooden dresser that had been there for decades. The blanket was folded neatly at the foot of the mattress exactly as I had left it years earlier. I stepped inside and glanced around, half expecting to see some sign that an animal had been hiding here, but the room looked untouched. The same was true for the second bedroom. The curtains swayed slightly in the breeze coming through a cracked window, and the ocean stretched beyond the glass like a calm gray painting. I stood there for a moment, feeling both relieved and confused. The footsteps had sounded so real. Perhaps my mind had played a trick on me after all. I turned to walk back into the hallway when something caught my attention at the far end. A section of the wall near the back corner looked darker than the rest, as if the wood had aged differently there. Curious, I walked closer. That was when I noticed something I had never seen before in all the years we owned the cottage. At the very end of the hallway, partially hidden by a narrow storage shelf, there was a small door built into the wall. The wood was older than the surrounding panels, rough and weathered, and the surface looked fragile, almost rotten. For a moment I simply stared at it, trying to understand how I could have spent nearly 30 years visiting this house without noticing it. Then, a quiet sound came from the other side of that door, soft and unmistakable, like the gentle movement of someone shifting their weight on the floor. The small door looked fragile, its surface rough and darkened by years of salt air, and for a long moment I simply stood there staring at it while my mind tried to understand what I was seeing. I was certain this door had never been here before, or at least I had never noticed it. Robert and I had walked this hallway hundreds of times during our summers at the cottage. Daniel had run through it as a child, racing from one room to another with sandy feet and loud laughter. Yet somehow this narrow door, tucked beside the storage shelf at the end of the hall, had escaped every memory I had of the place. I took a careful step closer. The air in the hallway felt strangely still, as if the entire house had gone quiet with me. The wood of the door was cracked in thin lines, and near the center an old metal handle hung slightly crooked. It looked like the kind of handle used on very old storage closets or crawl spaces. For a moment I wondered if perhaps it led to some small maintenance area inside the wall, something the previous owner had built decades ago, and we had simply ignored. That explanation felt reasonable, yet the sound I had heard from the other side did not feel like the movement of pipes or loose boards. It had sounded alive. I lifted my hand slowly and touched the surface of the door. The wood felt cool and slightly damp beneath my fingers. The moment my hand rested there, the faint sound came again from the other side. This time it was clearer. It was not scratching or rustling like an animal might make. It sounded like someone shifting gently on the floor, followed by a very soft breath. My heart began to beat faster. I pulled my hand back and listened carefully, wondering if I should call out. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Perhaps a child from a nearby house had somehow wandered inside while the cottage was empty. Maybe a local kid had discovered the place and used it as a secret hiding spot. Still, the idea made very little sense. The nearest neighbor lived nearly half a mile down the coast, and the front door had been closed when I arrived. I leaned closer to the door and spoke as calmly as I could. "Hello, is someone there?" My voice sounded softer than I expected in the narrow hallway. For several seconds there was no response. I began to wonder if I had imagined the earlier sound after all. Then, just as I was about to step back, a small voice came from behind the door. It was quiet and careful, the voice of a young child who was unsure whether it was safe to speak. The words were simple, but they sent a strange chill through me. The voice said, "Are you finally back?" I felt the air leave my lungs as I stood frozen in the hallway. The voice was not frightened or surprised. It sounded almost relieved, as if the person behind that door had been waiting for a long time. I tried to steady myself and spoke again, a little more firmly this time. "Who is there?" The hallway remained silent for a moment, and I could hear the distant waves through the window at the end of the corridor. Then the small voice answered again, softer now but unmistakably real. Said, "My mommy told me you would come someday." And suddenly the quiet beach house that had once been filled with summer laughter felt like a place I had never truly known at all. For a moment I could not move. The quiet voice behind the door echoed in my mind in a way that made the hallway feel smaller, almost as if the old beach house itself was holding its breath. "My mommy told me you would come someday." The sentence was simple, spoken with the calm certainty of a child who believed exactly what she had been told. I swallowed slowly and leaned a little closer to the door, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who is your mommy, sweetheart?" There was a pause on the other side, the faint sound of shifting again as if the child had moved closer to the door. Then the small voice answered carefully. "She said I should stay here and wait because you would know what to do." I felt a strange mixture of confusion and concern settle in my chest. None of this made sense. No one in my family had a child living in this house, and certainly not hidden behind a door I had never noticed before. I placed my hand on the crooked metal handle and tested it gently. It did not move. The handle rattled softly but the door stayed shut, as though it had been secured from the outside. That detail made my thoughts race even faster. Why would a child be behind a locked door in an empty beach house? I tried again, speaking gently. How long have you been in there? The answer came almost immediately. I'm not sure. Mommy said it might take a little while. Something about the calm way the child said those words made my heart tighten. I glanced down the hallway toward the staircase, half expecting to hear someone else moving in the house, but everything remained quiet except for the distant sound of the ocean. I took a slow breath and focused on the door again. What is your name, honey? The voice answered a moment later. My name is Lily. The name meant nothing to me, yet the situation felt too real to dismiss as some misunderstanding. Lily, I said softly, my name is Margaret. I am going to open this door, all right? Another short silence followed, and then the child spoke again in a voice that sounded almost relieved. Okay. I looked more closely at the door and realized the lock was nothing complicated, just an old sliding latch mounted on the outside. The metal was rusted from years of ocean air, but it still held the door in place. With careful fingers I pushed the latch sideways. It resisted at first, scraping loudly against the wood before finally sliding free with a dry metallic sound. My heart beat faster as I slowly pulled the door toward me. The hinges groaned softly, and a narrow space opened between the door and the frame. The room behind it was dim, lit only by a thin line of daylight coming from a small window high in the wall. For a second my eyes struggled to adjust to the shadowy space. Then I saw her. A small girl sat quietly on a folded blanket in the corner of the narrow room. She looked to be around 7 or 8 years old, with light brown hair falling loosely around her shoulders and wide blue eyes watching me carefully from across the room. She did not appear frightened. In fact, she looked almost calm, as if she had been expecting this exact moment. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Lily tilted her head slightly and said something that made my breath catch again. You look just like the lady in my mommy's photograph. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, trying to understand the words that had just come out of the little girl's mouth. You look just like the lady in my mommy's photograph. The sentence echoed strangely in the quiet space of the hidden room. The girl watched me with calm curiosity, as if this meeting was something she had expected for a very long time. The room itself was small, hardly more than a narrow storage space built into the back of the house. The walls were unfinished wood, and the ceiling slanted slightly beneath the roof. A thin rectangle of daylight slipped through a small window near the top of the wall, casting a pale beam across the floor. Aside from the folded blanket she sat on, there was very little in the room. A small backpack rested beside her and a plastic water bottle sat on the floor. Nothing about the space looked comfortable, yet the girl did not seem afraid or distressed. She simply looked at me with those wide blue eyes waiting for me to speak. I cleared my throat gently and stepped a little closer, careful not to move too quickly. What photograph are you talking about, Lily? She pointed toward the backpack beside her. Mommy showed me a picture before she left. She said if the lady in the picture ever came back to the house, I should tell her everything. My mind struggled to catch up with the situation unfolding in front of me. Someone had brought this child here and told her to wait for a woman who looked like me. The idea sounded almost impossible, yet the girl's calm voice made it feel undeniably real. I crouched down slightly so that we were closer to eye level. Do you know your mommy's name? Lily nodded slowly. Her name is Emily. The moment I heard that name my thoughts seemed to stop. Emily. My daughter-in-law. Daniel's wife. For several seconds I could not say anything at all. The sound of the ocean outside drifted faintly through the small window while my mind tried to process the connection. Emily had never mentioned a child named Lily. In fact, Daniel and Emily had often told me they were too busy with work to think about having children anytime soon. I forced myself to remain calm as I spoke again. Lily, sweetheart, when did your mommy bring you here? The girl tilted her head slightly as if thinking carefully about the answer. It was yesterday afternoon. She said I needed to stay quiet and wait because someone important would come. She said you would help me. I felt a deep uneasiness settle over me. Yesterday afternoon meant that while Daniel and Emily were both telling me they had a busy week planned in the city, Emily had apparently driven all the way to this remote beach house with a child I had never even heard about. I glanced toward the open door behind me, half expecting to hear another car outside or footsteps on the stairs, but the house remained silent. I looked back at Lily and asked the question that now felt impossible to ignore. "Where is your mommy now?" Lily lowered her eyes for a moment and then looked back at me with quiet honesty. She said she had to leave for a little while but that I should not worry because you would take care of me when you arrived. Then she added something that made the strange situation feel even heavier. She said, "You are my grandmother." I felt the words settle heavily in the quiet room. She said, "You are my grandmother." For a moment I simply looked at the small girl sitting on the blanket, trying to understand how something so impossible could sound so certain when spoken by a child. Lily did not appear confused or unsure. She said it the same way a child might say the sky is blue or the ocean is cold, as if it were simply a fact she had always known. I slowly lowered myself onto one knee so I was not standing over her. The room felt even smaller now, the slanted ceiling and narrow walls pressing the silence closer around us. Lily watched me carefully, waiting for my reaction. I forced a gentle smile even though my thoughts were racing in every direction. "Lily, sweetheart," I said quietly, "why did your mommy say that?" The girl reached toward her backpack and unzipped it with small careful movements. She pulled out a thin envelope that looked slightly wrinkled and held it toward me. "Mommy said if I ever met the lady in the picture I should give this to her." My hand felt strangely unsteady as I took the envelope. Inside was a photograph printed on regular paper. The image showed a much younger version of me standing on the porch of this very beach house, smiling beside Robert while the ocean stretched behind us. I recognized the photo immediately. Daniel had taken it one summer when he was about 12 years old. I had not seen that picture in years. I looked back at Lily slowly. "Where did your mommy get this picture?" Lily shrugged lightly. "She always kept it in her drawer. She said the lady in the picture was important and that one day I might meet her." My mind struggled to keep pace with the strange pieces of information falling into place. Emily had this photograph of me. Emily had brought Lily to this house yesterday. And Emily had told the girl that I was her grandmother. I stood up slowly and stepped back into the hallway for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. None of it matched the life I believed my son and his wife were living. Daniel and Emily had always told me they were focused on their careers, that children were something they might think about many years in the future. Yet here was a girl sitting quietly in a hidden room of my beach house, who believed with complete confidence that she belonged to our family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The signal along the coast was not always strong, but after a moment one small bar appeared at the top of the screen. My finger hovered over Daniel's name for a second before I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before he answered. His voice sounded normal at first, slightly distracted the way it often did during work hours. "Hi, Mom. Everything okay?" I glanced back toward the small doorway where Lily sat quietly watching the hallway. "Daniel," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice calm, "I need to ask you something." There was a short pause on the line. "Sure, Mom, what is going on?" I took a breath before speaking the words that now felt impossible to avoid. "Do you know a little girl named Lily?" The silence on the other end of the phone arrived so suddenly that it felt almost like the line had been cut. For several seconds Daniel did not say anything at all. Then when he finally spoke again, his voice sounded very different from before, tense in a way I had never heard from him. "Mom," he said quietly, "where are you right now?" I remained standing in the quiet hallway while Daniel's question echoed softly through the phone. "Where are you right now?" The tension in his voice was unmistakable. I looked toward the open doorway where Lily still sat on the blanket, watching me with patient curiosity as if she trusted that everything would work out exactly the way her mother had promised. I lowered my voice slightly and answered, "I am at the beach house, Daniel." There was another pause on the line, longer this time. I could almost imagine him running a hand through his hair, the way he used to do when something unexpected happened. When he spoke again his voice sounded tight and uneasy. "Mom, you were not supposed to go there today." The sentence made my heart sink a little. I had not told him the exact day I planned to drive up the coast, and hearing those words made the situation feel even stranger. I glanced once more toward Lily before speaking again. "Daniel, there is a little girl here. Her name is Lily. She says Emily brought her yesterday and told her to wait for me." The silence on the other end of the call felt heavier than before. I could hear Daniel breathing quietly, but he did not interrupt. After several seconds he finally spoke again, his voice lower now. Mom, listen to me carefully. I need you to leave the house and come back home. Right now. The urgency in his tone surprised me. I stepped a little farther into the hallway, keeping my voice calm. Daniel, I am not leaving a child alone in this house. Do you know who she is? Another long pause followed. When Daniel finally answered, his voice sounded conflicted, as if he was choosing his words very carefully. Mom, I was hoping you would not find out like this. The sentence made the air in the hallway feel colder. Find out what, Daniel? He exhaled slowly before answering. Lily is Emily's daughter. I felt the words settle into place in my mind, but they did not make the situation any easier to understand. Emily's daughter. My thoughts raced back through every conversation I had ever had with my daughter-in-law. She had never once mentioned having a child before meeting Daniel. In fact, she had always spoken about starting a family someday in the future, not about a child who already existed. Daniel continued speaking before I could ask another question. Emily had Lily when she was very young before we met. It was complicated, Mom. She kept it private because she was afraid people would judge her. I turned slowly toward the doorway again and saw Lily quietly drawing small shapes on the dusty floor with her finger while she waited. Daniel's explanation only raised more questions. If Emily had a daughter all this time, why had she hidden her from the entire family? And why bring her to this empty beach house and tell her to wait for me? I returned the phone to my ear and asked the question that now mattered most. Daniel, where is Emily right now? The answer came after a long, uneasy silence. That is the problem, Mom. I have been trying to reach her all morning, and she is not answering any of my calls. I stood quietly in the hallway for several seconds after Daniel finished speaking, the phone still pressed against my ear while the sound of the ocean drifted faintly through the windows of the old beach house. Emily was not answering any of his calls. The sentence felt heavier the longer I thought about it. I turned slowly and looked back toward the small hidden room where Lily sat on the blanket. She had pulled her backpack closer and was now hugging it lightly against her chest, watching me with the same patient expression that suggested she believed everything was unfolding exactly the way it was supposed to. I lowered my voice and spoke into the phone again. Daniel, listen carefully. Lily is safe. She is sitting right here in the house with me. On the other end of the line, I heard him release a long breath, the sound of someone who had been holding tension in his chest for far too long. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly. I was worried she might still be alone there. His words made me pause. You knew Emily brought her here, I said slowly. Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. I suspected it. Emily and I had an argument last night. She told me she could not keep hiding the truth from everyone anymore. I rested my hand against the hallway wall, trying to steady the swirl of thoughts moving through my mind. Daniel continued speaking, his voice softer now. Emily always wanted Lily to know her real family someday, but she was afraid of how people might react. She thought bringing Lily here first would make things easier. I looked again toward the doorway where the small girl waited quietly. Daniel, I said gently, Lily told me Emily said I would know what to do. Another quiet pause followed before he answered. That sounds like Emily. She always believed you would understand better than anyone else. The wind outside moved through the pine trees near the beach, and for a moment the whole house filled with the soft rustling sound. I ended the call a few minutes later after Daniel promised he would drive up the coast as soon as he could. When I placed the phone back in my pocket, I realized the strange tension I had felt earlier in the day had changed into something else entirely. I walked slowly back toward the small room and stopped at the doorway. Lily looked up immediately. Is everything okay? She asked in her quiet voice. I nodded and stepped inside the narrow space. Everything is going to be fine, sweetheart. Your mom will explain things when we find her. Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She opened her backpack and carefully took out a small picture book, placing it on her lap the way children do when they are comfortable in a familiar place. I watched her for a moment and felt an unexpected warmth settle into my chest. For years I had believed my family's future was growing smaller and quieter, that the beach house held nothing but memories of the past. Yet here in this hidden room sat a little girl who carried a piece of our family's story that none of us had known existed. I looked toward the small window where the gray ocean stretched across the horizon and realized something simple and certain at the same time. The house was not going to be sold after all. Instead, it was about to become the place where a new chapter of our family finally began.